The Rebbe began today's Farbrengen that this Shabbos is a special Shabbos because it comes as part of the Yemei Hashlama from Shavuos. The Gemara tells us that Shavuos, in times of the Beis HaMikdash, lasted only for one day. So when the Yidden came to the Beis HaMikdash, and everyone was obligated to come, and everyone had to be makriv v'korban, it was physically, there was not enough time, there was not a chance for everyone to be makriv v'korban in this one day of Shavuos. Therefore, other Yom Tovim last longer. Sukkot and Pesach are much longer. However, the Yontif of Shavuos is only a Yontif that lasts one day. Therefore, the Chachamim, Bizman Habayis, added on 7 days of Tashlumin that come, that until the 12th day in the month of Sivan, a Yid still had an opportunity in the time of the Beis HaMikdash to bring the korban which we're obligated to bring on the day of Shavuos. On one hand, Svarim tell us an exception in Shavuos, that Shavuos is only one day, as opposed to other Yom Tovim which are for 7 or 8 days, which the fact that it's one day shows that it resembles the idea of Achdus, the idea of unity. It reflects which reflects godliness, it reflects Getlichkeit. On the other hand, we say that there were 7 days added when a Yid has a chance to be mashlim, to fill in whatever he missed out on Shavuos. Tashlumin, which simply means to fill in. However, the Rebbe says it has a deeper meaning. The Rebbe says it means it also elevates, it's a hashlam, it's a completion for Shavuos. In other words, when is Shavuos complete to the highest extent? When we have gone through all these 7 days, all these Shivas Yemei Tashlumin, up to after Yud Beis Sivan, 12 days in the month of Sivan. Though, if we look carefully, we will see that we only have 6 days of Tashlumin. Why do we constantly find the expression Shivas Yemei Tashlumin? So the Rebbe explained that Bichlal, we are obligated to bring the korban on Shavuos. However, on this day of Shavuos in itself, one has an opportunity to bring a korban earlier in the day, or he has a chance to bring the korban later in the day. We know, b'negeyim mitzvahs, it's always better, zrizin makdimin. The earlier we can do a mitzvah, it's better to do it. So if one has a chance to bring the korban, say Shavuos morning, or Shavuos afternoon, by all means, the one who brings the Shavuos morning is more appreciated than the one that brings the Shavuos afternoon. So therefore the Rebbe says we are counting in the total days of Shivas Yemei Tashlumin. True, there are 6 additional days besides the day of Yontif. However, the day of Yontif in itself is also counted as one of Yemei Tashlumin. Why is it counted as one of Yemei Tashlumin? Because for those that bring the korban not Shavuos morning, but for those that bring the korban in the afternoon, in the sense it's like a tashlumin, because they also did not bring it in the proper time. Because the proper time to bring the korban is Shavuos morning, to rush and to be from the first Rizah Magdim ila mitzvahs, and here they went ahead and brought the korban later in the day. This is very similar, the Rebbe says, to what we find b'negei korban Pesach. The whole concept of korban Pesach is also for the one that did not have an opportunity to bring the korban Pesach on the right time, which is the 14th day of Nisan. So the Torah set aside a concept of Pesach Sheni, which is on the 14th day of Iyar. Exactly 1 month later, we give a person a chance to fill in, to make up what he should have done earlier a month ago. By Pesach Sheni, however, it may have been a person that sinned to such an extent that he caused that he should be tameh, perhaps willingly. Not only this, maybe one who falls into the category, as the Gemara uses the expression, echta v'ashuv. A person says he sinned, and he's proud of it to the extent that he's going to sin again. So the Gemara says that one that is proud of himself to such an extent that he says, Echta v'oshuv. However, he claims that he's sinning because he knows there's an opening door for him. So the Gemara says, this person is not get a chance to do tshuva. However, Chassidus explains, what's the pshat maspikin biyodei la'aseh tshuva? It doesn't mean that the doors of tshuva are locked for this person. Dachak v'nichnas, that's the expression that the Rebbe uses in Tanya. If he pushes through, he's also welcome. Pshat is, it's not as easy for him to do tshuva as for somebody else. However, what we do derive from all of this is that Pesach Sheni is to help out the person who sinned. And it's the famous expression from the Frierdiker Rebbe regarding Pesach Sheni, that the moral we take from Pesach Sheni is, as sinishtakim farfaun. It is never too late. What type of a position one may have been when it came Pesach Rishon, he always has an opportunity to make up in Pesach Sheni. He was b'derech hachoika, he was far away from the Beis HaMikdash on Pesach Rishon, meaning far away spiritually as well. So we say, comes the Pesach Sheni, he has a chance to make up what he missed out on. However, b'negei Shavuos, it's not necessarily the idea of him sinning. It's just the mere fact that one did not have the opportunity to bring, physically wasn't able to bring the Korban Shavuos, and in the emes, it's not possible for all the Yidden to bring the Korban all on this one day of Yontif. So that is why the Chachamim set up additional days, which are called Yemei Tashlumin, days to make up, and at the same time, these are the days that complete the Yontif of Shavuos. In other words, the Yontif of Shavuos is not complete unless we go through these additional days to give Yidden an opportunity to be able to be Makriv the Korban. It is Shabbos Parshas Naso today as well, so we also read about the various Korbanos of the Nesiim. The Korbanos of the Nesiim, whereby each Nasi brought a Korban for his Shevet, representing his Shevet. B'negei Korbanos Nesiim, the Korbanos were so chashiv and so worthy to the extent that even on Shabbos it was also permitted to bring a Korban of the Nesiim by the dedication of the Mishkan. Though normally we know there are only limited Korbanos which can be brought on Shabbos. For example, the Yemei Tashlumin, which we are just talking about, the days to make up for Shavuos, and we always must have a Shabbos in between. Because if there's Shivas Yemei Tashlumin, in a cycle of a week, there always must be a Shabbos. However, this Shabbos cannot be utilized for bringing Karbonos in the Beis HaMikdash. Why? Because it is only Karbonos Tzibur, public Karbonos, which we are allowed to bring on Shabbos, as opposed to a Korban Yochid, which these Karbonos, which each and every Yid brings on Yontef, fall into the category of a Korban Yochid. A Korban Yochid one is not allowed to bring on Yontef. The Karbonos The Karbonos which we read about today, which the various Nesiim brought, these Karbonos were brought on Shabbos as well. And in fact, it also stretched for a period to give each and every Nasi an opportunity to bring a Korban, as of the Yom HaRishon, which was on a Sunday. So when we come to the Yom HaShvi, it's a Shabbos. And we read in Chumash, and today said, who was the Nasi that was Makriv b'Yom HaShvi? It was Nasi Levnei Ephraim. The Nasi of Shevet Ephraim, he was Makriv the Korban on Shabbos. So today, as being Parshas Naso, in other words, mitzad the Korbanos that come as the Shivas Yemei Tashlumin on this day of Shabbos, cannot be Makriv these Korbanos. However, the Karbonos which come as a result, the Karbonos which the Nesiim brought as a result of the Chanukas HaMishkan, this they were allowed to be Makriv on Shabbos as well. Rebbe proved how we see in the Torah the inyan of Avos Yisrael, and further than Avos Yisrael, the Rebbe keeps on stressing the inyan of Achdus Yisrael, total unity of all of Klal Yisrael. We know that B'negei Svira, there's the interpretation of the tzdukim, those that believed only in Torah shebiksav, and b'shas the Torah tells us that we are supposed to count Sfira, usfartem lochem mimochas haShabbos. The Chachamim interpret, when do we start counting Sfira? Shabbos does not necessarily mean from tomorrow of Shabbos, in other words on a Sunday. It means that we begin counting Sfira from the next day of Pesach, from after the first day of Pesach, the second night of Pesach, that is when we begin counting Sfira. Regardless what day in the week this should fall out. And this is the proper interpretation, how the Chachamim have interpreted, and how Klal Yisrael have adapted, because we believe not only in Torah shebiksav, but in Torah shebal peh as well. So therefore, whatever the Chachamim have taught us and have related to us, in addition to what says befeirish in the Psukim, we follow. The Tzdukim, however, they only believe in what is said befeirish in Torah shebiksav. Al pi Torah shebiksav, they hold that the counting of Sfira should go mimochas haShabbos, always to start on a Sunday. So the Rebbe once explained it at length, and it's printed in one of the recent Likutei Sichos, and referred to it today as well, that it's explained in Svarim, that when do we have a full, complete Sfira Sa'imah? In other words, the Sfira Sa'imah Tmimois completely, when we mamish count 7 full weeks, that is when we begin counting on a Sunday. Because if we begin counting on a Sunday, pshat is then we count 7 full weeks. If we begin in the middle of the week, so the week is broken already. However, when we begin mimochas haShabbos, if the first day of Pesach should fall out on a Shabbos, and it happens, then we begin Motzei Shabbos, we begin counting Motzei Shabbos, which is mimochas haShabbos, Sunday the first day, then we have 7 full weeks. The Rebbe says it's remarkable. We do not hold from the opinion of the tzdukim. According to us, we count Sfira any day in the week, whenever the first day of Pesach should fall out. We begin the second night of Pesach to count Sfira. Still we see that when is it some sort of a shleimus in the mitzvah of Sfira Sa'imah, that it should be considered real Tmimois, it is when we begin counting Mimachas HaShabbos from Sunday. In other words, we see that somehow the Chachamim gave some sort of an esinas makom to the opinion of those that interpret the Mimachas HaShabbos literally, that it means mamish from Sunday. The Rebbe says it's remarkable. We're talking about people who are megale panim b'Torah shaloi k'halacha. They learn pshat in Torah not as it should be, shaloi k'halacha, and naturally this is unwanted and not respected by us, not at all. At the same time, we say that when do we fulfill mitzvah Sfira Sa'imah in a way of Tmimois? That is when we begin counting from Sunday on. In other words, this shows the tremendous Avas Yisrael and Achdus Yisrael, that we unite ourselves with each and every Yid, even with those Yidden who do not believe in the interpretation of the Chachamim in Torah. They believe only in Torah shebiksav. Still, we unite ourselves with each and every Yid to such an extent that we say that when is mitzvah Sfira Sa'imah fulfilled properly, when we count 7 full weeks from Sunday to Sunday, 7 full weeks. In the second Sicha, the Rebbe began as a hemshech to the Shavuos the Farbrengen. He said that being that we are still in a hemshech to Shavuos, it is appropriate to talk about an inyan which has a very strong shaychus to Shavuos, to such an extent that this was the condition in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's giving the Torah, and that is the Jewish child. We know that when Chazal tell us that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu said that He's going to give the Torah, He demanded a guarantor. And the Chachamim tell us which was the guarantor that HaKadosh Baruch Hu accepted. It was Baneinu Eirvim Ba'adeinu. When the Rebishter heard that the Yidden are willing to give the children as guarantors, this is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu accepted as a good guarantee that we will observe the Torah. So therefore it's an appropriate time, the Rebbe says, to fill in on an inyan which has a shaychus to children and has a shaychus to Shavuos. The Rebbe says in the Emes, the days before Shavuos would have been appropriate days to have a rally with children. However, being that it was not done, at least the days after Shavuos should be utilized for this worthy cause, to see to it to gather children, groups of children, and have a rally with them and explaining them the greatness of Kabbalah Satira and so forth. And this should be done at least in the Yemei Tashlumin, which we just discussed, these days until Yud Beis Sivan. If it is not possible, for whatever reason, to do it until Yud Beis Sivan, at least it should be done until the end of this week. Because the emes is this entire week has a shaykhus to Kabbalah Satira. Why? Shavuos was on Wednesday. We know Wednesday is referred to as Malei Shabbata. Wednesday already has a shaykhus to the forthcoming Shabbos. So Shavuos has a shaykhus to today. Because Shavuos was just on Wednesday. We know what Chazal tell us, that Shabbos, minei mizborchin kula yomen, the entire week gets bracha from Shabbos. So Mamela, this Shabbos has a shaykhus to Shavuos. This Shabbos gives bracha into the entire week. So therefore, this entire week still has a shaykhus to Shavuos. So therefore, the Rebbe urged that it would be very appropriate that all over to make rallies of children during Matoiv. Better if it could be done until Tuesday, including Tuesday, which is the 12th day of Sivan, and if not, at least until the end of the week. Incidentally, the rally in 770 will be this Monday afternoon. Around 2 o'clock probably. Then in the second Sikha, the Rebbe referred back to an inyan which he discussed in the Shavuos de Farbrengen. In the Shavuos de Farbrengen, the Rebbe discussed a very delicate inyan regarding the Nitzchias HaTorah, the eternity of Torah. And on one hand, we know that we constantly keep on stressing that each and every inyan in Torah is eternal. As the famous expression in the Rambam is, HaTorah hazu lo tehei mechlefes, that any inyan in Torah will never be changed. On the other hand, the Rebbe brought out, we find inyanim in Torah which obviously did change in accordance to many generations ago until nowadays. And this is, the Rebbe says, we find in Talmud and we find in Sifrei Kadmonim various inyanim of refuah, various type of healings, medications, which authentic Svarim write that these inyanim only applied in prior generations. And in these generations today, this does not apply. So the Rebbe raised the question in the Shavuos de Farbrengen. Obviously, it's contradictory. On one hand, we say that everything in Torah is accurate and it holds out at all times and at all places. On the other hand, Svarim say that these inyanim in Torah were only for certain times, and now it is not applicable, and we shouldn't even make use of these methods in refuah, which are discussed in Svar. And in the Shavuos de Farbrengen, the Rebbe referred to a letter written by Rabbi Avram ben Arambam, where Rabbi Avram ben Arambam discusses this issue at length, and Itaka says that all these inyanim shall not be applied to nowadays. Also, the Rebbe quoted in the Shavuos de Farbrengen a letter from the Gaonim, which he says was written prior to the Rambam and prior to the Rambam's son, naturally. Where the Gaonim also write the same inyan, that this concept of all inyane refuah, all the inyanim of medication, which is discussed in Chazal, is not applicable now at times. The Rambam in the Moira Nevuchim writes the same as well. The Rambam in Yad HaChazaka, which is the halacha seif of the Rambam, keeps on stressing how every inyan in Torah is eternal. HaTorah hazu lo tehei mechlefes. The same Rambam in his Moira Nevuchim writes that there's many inyanim in Torah which are only for certain times and certain generations, and now it has no effect and it would not help us, and people should not even get involved using these methods. The emes is that in the Likutei Sichos, which was published for last Shabbos, this inyan is discussed, and it's taken from a Sicha, from a conversation which the Rebbe had with the Gera Rebbe's brother, Pinchas Menachem, when he visited the Rebbe a few weeks ago. And this is the issue which was discussed. And it's published already in the Likutei Sichos. And in the Shavuos de Farbrengen, the Rebbe discussed it at length. And today again, the reason why the Rebbe discussed it in today's Farbrengen again is because in the Ha'aras Hatmimim, these various commentaries on Sichos which are published, the various yeshivas, there was a publication published between the Shavuos the Farbrengen and this Shabbos, which is between Friday, where questions are raised on this inyan, and therefore the Rebbe responded to it in today's Farbrengen as well, with an introduction. Rebbe said that he stressed several occasions already that when he discusses inyanim and Farbrengens, says, don't quote me exactly. The Rebbe says he's out to discuss an inyan, but at many times while discussing an inyan, he may have a misquotation from a source, as the expression goes, a pleitas haloshen or a pleitas hakulmis, saying an extra unintended word, but it does not. He means the inyan, and he does not mean that each and every word should be built on, and therefore questions should be asked, and so on and so forth. And the Rebbe said that we find a difference between the Alter Rebbe and the Mittel Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe used to discuss inyanim extremely brief. He was very brief in whatever he brought out. The Mittel Rebbe, the contrary. The Mittel Rebbe, the Rebbe used the expression Rechoives HaNohar. If we look into the Mittel Rebbe's Svarim, we find that all the inyanim which the Mittel Rebbe explains and discusses, he really elaborates on them and explains them at very much at length. So therefore the Rebbe says when the Alter Rebbe is quoted, there would always come a close quotation. At kan l'shoinei hazahav. Until here is the gold words of the Alter Rebbe. However, when the Mittel Rebbe at times may bring words from the Alter Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, who was the son-in-law of the Mittel Rebbe and a close disciple of him and as well as of the Alter Rebbe, writes that because of the lengthy explanation of the Mittel Rebbe, at times it's very hard to differentiate what are the words of the Mittel Rebbe and what are the words of the Alter Rebbe that he quotes. Why? Because the Mittel Rebbe's form of explaining is very much, as the Rebbe used the expression, Rechoives HaNohar, a very broad and lengthy explanation. Therefore, the Rebbe says when he gets involved in explaining an inyan really at length, there's no call and he does not want that inyanim questions should be built on various expressions which he said. If you want to raise a shaila on the inyan which is discussed, fine. However, to raise a shaila on such an expression as opposed to such an expression, the Rebbe says he does not mean the words exactly as he says them. He means the inyan rather than the words. To be medayik in each and every word. Because again, he gets involved in lengthy explanation and interpretation of the inyan in which he discusses. Behemshech to this, the Rebbe raised another very delicate inyan in the Shavuos Farbrengen and today's Farbrengen as well. There's a famous machlokes between the Rambam and the Raavad. When the Rambam discusses the Eibishter, the Rambam tells us that we are not allowed to, under any circumstances, have any error and think that when the Torah uses the expression the hand of Hashem or the eye of Hashem, that Hashem Chas v'Shalom physically has a hand or an eye. There is no Gashmiyas dike description to the Eibishter. The Eibishter is not a Geshem. The Raavad, who is the one that argues with the Rambam and many inyanim, comments, Harbe gdoilim v'tovim imenu. There were many that were greater than the Rambam and better than the Rambam. Halchu b'zu hashita. Did go in the approach that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, mitzad his greatness, can also limit himself and can be defined as a Yad Hashem and a Ayin Hashem and a Regel Hashem and so forth. So the Rebbe asks, once we have these two opinions, these are extremely contradictory opinions. One cannot believe in one opinion and as well believe in the other opinion. Or the Rebbe brought another example of another Yesodistic inyan, which is discussed by the Alter Rebbe. And this is the question of Tzimtzum Kipshutai. In Hasidus there's a great deal at length explained the concept of Tzimtzum, meaning HaKadosh Baruch Hu limiting himself and creating the world and getting involved in all the details of the world and so forth. The Alter Rebbe says we cannot interpret tzimtzum kipshutai literally. And those that do interpret it literally, the Alter Rebbe uses the expression shagu. They made a mistake. The Rebbe in the Shavuos the Farbrengen said he does not want to mention the names of those Gdolei Yisrael that they do believe in the Shitta of Tzimtzum Kipshuta. Their belief is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is that great that he can be zich mit Tzamtzim literally as well. And in today's Farbrengen, the Rebbe again elaborated on this inyan, and the question which was raised was, for example, if, according to the Shit of the Alter Rebbe, that claims Tzimtzum Kipshutai cannot be accepted. Those that hold Tzimtzum Kipshutai, which according to the Alter Rebbe it's wrong in Emunah. The Alter Rebbe says it's a shkoga, it's a mistake. If we hold that Shitta, is that Shitta ausgehalten in Torah? Now the question is, should we say Birchas HaTorah before we recite that Shitta or shouldn't we? In other words, once the Alter Rebbe has given a total exclusion on this opinion, does that mean that the one that does believe that opinion is not an opinion of Torah, because the Alter Rebbe excluded this opinion, and therefore for one that for whatever reason wants to look into a sefer that discusses the contrary opinion, or even if we're talking the Rambam and the Raavad, the Rambam totally does not agree with the Raavad. The Raavad does not agree with the Rambam. For one that wants to get involved, if we accept the Rambam's opinion, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu ein lo guf, ein lo dmus haguf. If we look into the Raavad, according to the Rambam, there's no mokum in Torah to say so. Is the Raavad's opinion considered Torah that would require Birchas HaTorah before we look into this, we'll go through this inyan, we'll learn this inyan, no, wouldn't it? The Rebbe brought a very obvious example from an open Gemara. The Rebbe says Rav Ashi, very famous Amayra. So famous to the extent that he was the one that compiled Talmud Bavli. And naturally he goes into the category of a Talmud Vosik, Osid Lachadesh, everything which Rav Ashi himself said is considered part of Torah. We find in Gemara Rav Ashi saying an opinion. Then the Gemara asks a question on Rav Ashi's opinion. And when the Gemara raises the question on Rav Ashi's opinion, and the Gemara shlugs up Rav Ashi, the Gemara uses a very strong expression. The Gemara uses the expression, Ho de Rav Ashi bedusahi. That what Rav Ashi just said is a bedusa. Bedusa, to literally translate the word, would mean it's a narishkeit. In other words, the Gemara totally does not accept what Rav Ashi says. So the Rebbe says, well, we're going to learn the Gemara of Rav Ashi. And the Gemara slugs it up to such an extent that the Gemara defines it as a bedusa, as a shtus. Definitely one cannot go ahead and learn the Gemara, the sayings of Rav Ashi, without Birchas HaTorah. Therefore, each and every inyan in Torah is definitely Torah. And the Rebbe got into a lengthy explanation that even the contrary shitta to the Alter Rebbe b'negei tzimtzum also has a mokum in Torah. And the Rebishter mitzad him being an Ein Sof is all over, whether we are talking in Kodesh HaKadoshim, or we're talking in a mokum ha'ashpa, or we're talking in a place where even we're not allowed to say a davar shebekdusha, or a place which al pi Torah should not even exist, and there are such places, place of Avodah Zarah. However, the Rebishter mitzad his greatness, and the Rebishter mitzad being a koil yachol, can be all over. So the Rebbe explained that the Nakuda of today's explanation was that there are various madregas. And there are some people that are shaykh to one interpretation, and there are others that are shaykh to another interpretation. And the Rebbe said, use the expression that it's very hard to understand in Seichel the Alter Rebbe's interpretation why Tzimtzum cannot be learned Kipshutai. And therefore those Yidden that do believe in Tzimtzum Kipshutai, there is a logic in Torah for it, and there is room in Torah for it. The Rebbe brought a story that the Alshich, Moshe Alshich, the famous Alshich, he was a disciple of the Arizal. And when the Arizal was darshaning in Yonim in Kabbalah, was saying in Yonim in Kabbalah in front of his disciples, the Alshich always used to fall asleep. The Alshich felt very bad about it, so he came to the Arizal, and asked him for a tickle. He feels very bad that when his Rebbe dashens, he falls asleep. The Rebbe said, perhaps this is a limut schus for those that fall asleep during the Farbrengens as well. If the Alshich was able to fall asleep when the Arizal said Divrei Torah, so the Arizal told him that his neshama is only shayach to Olam Hadrush, the neshama of the Alshich. And therefore, the Arizal's major inyan was Kabbalah. So when the Arizal was learning Kabbalah, the Alshich used to fall asleep. Though the Rebbe Eredar, and we find that the Tzemach Tzedek in his Chassidus quotes many times the Alshich, to such an extent that he does explain in Yonim Chassidus and Kabbalah based on Alshich. But this is because all in Yonim and Torah, all Chelkei HaTorah are tied one with another. Pshat, Remes, Drush and Soid, being that they're all Torah, they're all part, they all intermingle one with another. However, when we're talking about a major inyan in Kabbalah, it has no shaykhs to somebody whose major inyan is drush. Therefore, the Rebbe said the same can be applied when we're talking about these various inyanim. Whether it's the Rambam, the machlokes of the Rambam and the Raavad of his Gashmus Elokius. There are those that are not up to the standard of believing the interpretation of the Rambam, and they only can understand and define the Rebishter with the interpretation of the Raavad. There are those that can go and have a deeper understanding as the Rambam refers to the Rebishter. The same has been the interpretation of the Alter Rebbe, and those who the Alter Rebbe refers to as Shagu, they have made a mistake in the interpretation of Tzimtzum. However, there are some that as far as they can reach in Torah, they will reach only to the understanding of the interpretation of Tzimtzum Kipshutoi, rather than the Alter Rebbe explains it. Another inyan which the Rebbe spoke in today's Farbrengen and has a shaykhis to Shavuos, in the Farbrengen of Shavuos, as well as in the Farbrengen of Monday night, the evening before Shavuos, the Rebbe stressed the name of Atzeres. Shavuos having another name, Atzeres. What's the pshat Atzeres? Atzeres means to hold ourselves back from doing things. Whereby the Rebbe pointed out, in the Shavuosdik Farbrengen, the Rebbe mentioned that this is a vote from the Barditchever, Lev Yitzchak of Barditchev, that all other Yom Tovim have some special inyan which we have to fulfill in this Yontif. Pesach, whole inyan of not eating chametz, eating matzah, all the mitzvahs that are involved in the Yontif of Pesach. Sukkot, we have to go out to eat in a sukkah. However, Shavuos, the Yontif Shavuos is based on Atzeres. The mere fact that we hold ourselves back from doing malacha, this is the fulfilling of the Yontif of Shavuos. However, there is no positive inyan which has to be done in order to fulfill the Yontif of Shavuos properly. So again, in this Ha'aras HaTmimim, which was published on Friday, they raised the question, Shavuos had special korbanos, which other Yomim Tovim did not have. So again, we find an inyan in Shavuos, which we do not find in other Yomim Tovim. So the Rebbe explained that, true. However, being that Achachum Habayis, this was the only inyan that now we do not have any way to differentiate any special inyan, positive thing, which has to be done on Shavuos different than any other day. Is a siman now that this is true. There was something additional in Shavuos. However, this was not something major in Shavuos. Being that now we can observe Shavuos properly without doing anything special which is done l'chavit Shavuos, while other Yomim Tovim, even nowadays that there is no Beis HaMikdash, do have special Yonim. Pesach has its in Yonim, and Sukkot has its in Yonim. This in itself shows us that mainly Shavuos does not have any special inyan, and that is why Shavuos is referred to in the Torah with the title of Atzeres. Shavuos is only in Atzeres we hold ourselves back from doing malacha. This is the idea of the Yontif of Shavuos. Later in the Farbrengen, it's customary, the Rebbe learned Rashi in this week's Sedra and also interpreted a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos and the Perek Rishon of Pirkei Avos. Being that today is the first Shabbos after Shavuos. Between Pesach and Shavuos, it's accepted by all to say Pirkei Avos. However, after Shavuos, the Alter Rebbe writes in the Siddur, Yesh Noyagin, there are some that fear sich that they say Pirkei Avos as well in these Shabbosim. And the Rebbe brought out that we find in the Mamorim from the Rabbeim, the Maimah, how a Rebbe would always begin a Maimah, it always begins with a pasuk of that given Sedra. There are many Mamorim that begin with Mishnas and Pirkei Avos, and these Mamorim were said by the Rabbeim during the Shabbosim after Shavuos, the summer Shabbosim. So we see that in the summer Shabbosim as well, the Rabbeim would say Pirkei Avos, and the fact that they said it in Mamor, they began Mamorim with a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, this in itself shows us that it's not something which they kept silent, or a minig which they only did themselves, bechadri chadorim, in closed doors. This is something which they reveal to all of us. However, during the weeks of Pesach and Shavuos, we have 6 Shabbosim, so it comes out that we recite 1 Perek each Shabbos. Between Shavuos and Rosh Hashanah, if we keep on saying Pirkei Avos, and we repeat it several times, we may have some Shabbosim that we will have to recite more than 1 Perek. This, the Rebbe says, is very simple. If we follow the calendar, we will notice that there are many Shabbosim that we have to say more than 1 Perek in order to be able to finish Pirkei Avos by Rosh Hashanah. Naturally, more than 1 time, several times. The Rebbe again referred to what was discussed last week. Benegei, the title of Pirkei Avos. Why is it called Avos? Because it comes as an introduction to Torah. The inyanim which are discussed in Pirkei Avos are inyanim of Derech Eretz. And Derech Eretz is Kadma LaTorah. Derech Eretz comes before Torah. And being that Shavuos is the Zman of Kabbalah SaTorah, that is why in the weeks before Shavuos we prepare ourselves with Derech Eretz and inyanim of Yerushalayim, which Milah de Chasidusa, which all this is discussed in Pirkei Avos, which this comes as an introduction to Kabbalah SaTorah. Prior to Pirkei Avos, we stress Kol Yisrael Yesh Lam Chelek L'Olam Haba. Again, the greatness of every Yid, that every Yid will be rewarded with Olam Haba. As the Rebbe stressed, Torah and the world was created because of Torah and because of Yisrael. So that is why, as an opening to Pirkei Avos, we read about Kol Yisrael Yesh Lam Chelek L'Olam Haba, and right after about Moshe Kibel Torah Misina. The 2 great inyanim that because of these 2 inyanim the world was created. The world was created because of Yisrael and because of Torah. And this inyan of Olam Haba is something eternal. It's a schar nitzchi, which the Rebbe is rewarding to each and every Yid. Furthermore, the Rebbe says, we look into Avos, we will see that right after the Mishnah of Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai, the chain of Kabbalah SaTorah, comes the Mishnah of Shimon HaTzadik Hoya Mashiach Knesses HaGdolah. What does that? What does Mishnah Beis tell us? Al Shloisha Dvarim Olam Oimid, that the world stands on 3 pillars: Torah, Avodah, and Gemilas Chesed. What does this come to show? That the whole inyan of Torah is to elevate the world. Right away after the Mishnah has told us all about Torah and the shalshelas of Torah, that Moshe was the one that received Torah from Sinai and turned it over to Yeshua, etc. Right away we read in Mishnah Beis that what is the whole inyan of Torah? That to see to it that the world should be an oimed, the world should be standing, and standing on 3 pillars. And which 3 pillars? On Torah, Avodah, and Gemilas Chesed. Let us look to the very end of the first Perek, the last Mishnah, Rab Shimon ben Gamliel Oimeh. Again, what does he say? The world is existing again on 3 things. So what do we see? We see from this that the whole inyan of Torah came to elevate the existence of the world. And that is why at the beginning of the first Perek and at the end of the first Perek there is a Mishnah that stresses what brings to it that the world should be an Oimed and that the world should be a Kayim. As stressed by many occasions in previous years, the Rebbe says if we look into Perek Rishon, each one of the Tanoim says something and says it in 3 parts. We come to Mishnah Yud Beis, which talks about Hillel v'Shamai, Kiblu mehem, Hillel loimer, Havei mitalmidav shel Aaron. Oyev shalom, roidev shalom, oyev esabriyos, umekarven l'Torah. So again, Hillel, who was a Nasi, the Rebbe says a Nasi has the same status of a Melech, and Hillel, being a Nasi, advised Yidden for a tremendous amount of Avas Yisrael. Follow Aaron's footsteps. Oyev shalom, roidev shalom, oyev esabriyos, umekarven l'Torah. The Rebbe elaborated and spoke about it many occasions. Mishnah uses the expression oyev habriyos. You shall like loving your fellow creatures. Why doesn't the Mishnah use any other type of an expression? Oyev hanoshim, oyev Yehudim, oyev Yisrael, oyev chavercha, whatever. So the Rebbe stresses that Hillel tells us that we are supposed to like each and every person. In other words, a person that does not possess any qualities within himself, any qualifications, other than the fact that he's a nivra, he was created by the Eibishter. More than that, the person does not possess. So Hillel tells us, express and extend love even to such a person as well. And we find it in Hillel's own attitude. Came an individual who at that time was still a goy, and told him he wants to know about Torah, and put up conditions. Just didn't tell Hillel, tell me about Torah. Told him, Lamdeini kol ha-Torah al regel achas. Teach me the entire Torah on one leg. So we see the difference between Shammai and Hillel, the famous story. Shammai did not welcome this person. However, Hillel was extremely responsive to the person and answered him and accepted him. This is the person that at the way Hillel looked at him at that time, he was only a bria. The man did not have anything else to himself. He was a guy that wanted to know about Torah. And Hillel found the proper words to tell this person and was a mekarev and extended love to him. Furthermore, the Rebbe brought the Chazal. Chazal tell us that Aaron's inyan was Avos Yisrael. When Aaron saw two people in an argument, and Aaron wanted to make shalom between the two people, Aaron would go over to one of them and tell him, the other person who you're in an argument with is inquiring about you and wants to know how you feel and wants to know what's doing by you. Naturally, when this person got the feeling that the person who he's in an argument with is out to make up with him, so definitely he responded warmly. Kemayim haponim laponim. One person has the same feeling to the other, and by doing such type of things, Aaron brought about shalom between Yidden where there was a need for it. The same is what Hillel says. If there is a need to bring two people close to Torah, if you have to do an action, if you have to do a deed to bring two people close to another, or bring two people close to Torah, which the whole idea of Torah is shalom, go right ahead and do it. In other words, don't just talk about this inyan of Avos Yisrael. Believe in Avos Yisrael. Extend love to people only theoretically. If it requires some sort of action, you have to go ahead and do it as well. Then we come to the next Mishnah. What is the next Mishnah? Hu hayoim. He was the one that said, who is the he? Hillel. Mishnah Yud Gimel and Perek Aleph. What does he say? Negat Shema, Avat Shema. Very strange Mishnah. It's a Mishnah in Aramaic. Very strange. All of Mishnah is Lashon HaKodesh. Constantly. All of Pirkei Avos is Lashon HaKodesh as Hebrew. Here we come to a Mishnah in Aramaic. The emissaries, the Rebbe pointed out, there's another Mishnah in Aramaic. In the 5th Perek. In Perek Hamishi, Mishnah Chaf Aleph, Ben Bagbag Oimer. Hafachba, Vahafachba, the Kulaba is also a Mishnah which is in Aramaic. But however, that Mishnah, the Rebbe says there's good reason for it being in Aramaic. Why? Some tell us Ben Bagbag was a Geir. In fact, there are Svarim that say that Ben Bagbag and Ben Hey was the same person. Bag and Hey is the same. Hey is 5, Bag is Beis and Gimel. Beis and Gimel is again 5. Why were they referred to? Why was this person referred to as Ben Bagbag or Ben Hey? They were Geirim. So they were Geirim. So it has a shayches to Avram and Sarah. Avram and Sarah, Chazal tell us that they were Megayer people. And by Avram and Sarah, we find the Indian of a Hey outstanding. Avram's name was changed from Avram to Avraham, and Sarai was changed from Sarai to Sarah. So therefore, this Gael was referred to as Ben Hey Hey. He was a Ben Hey Hey from Avram and Sarah who devoted their time to Gael. So that is why, being that he was a Gael, so his native tongue was Aramaic, so that is why when he said a Mishnah, he said it in Aramaic. However, here we're talking about Hillel. Hillel was a Nasi. Hillel was a descendant of Malchus Beis David. He was a descendant of Shevet Yehuda. Why did Hillel get involved in interpreting a Mishnah and saying a Mishnah in Aramaic? So the Rebbe explained, Hillel was in Bavel. Hillel was a Nasi for Yidden in Bavel. There's a famous story, the Gemara tells us in Psachim, how Hillel was appointed to be a Nasi. That it was an Erev Pesach that fell out on a Shabbos. Nis alma halacha mibnei beseira. The Yidden did not know the details how the Korban Pesach should have been brought. Who was the one that told Yidden how Korban Pesach should be brought? It was Hillel. And in merit of that, Hillel was appointed to be a Nasi. Bavel was an Indian of Golos. Gemara uses the expression, the Gemara Sanhedrin, "B'machshakim hoishivani" is a Talmud Bavli. I was sat into darkness. There's a pasuk in Eicha. Gemara refers this pasuk to Talmud Bavli. So we see that Bavel stands for the concept of Golos, the concept of darkness. Here in Bavel, Hillel is talking the language of Bavel. That is why he's giving us advice in this sprach. What is Hillel saying? Negat Shema Avat Shemeh. Pashat Pshat. He who seeks renown loses his name. What's the Pshat? The Rebbe teaches Negat Shema. If a person wants to be renowned, he wants to build his own name in Torah, and not tying Torah that Torah comes from the Eibishter, and Torah is part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then really Avat Shemeh. Then he loses his name. Then we come to another step in the Mishnah. Udala Moisef Yosef. He who does not increase his knowledge of Torah decreases it. As the Rebbe explained, the Alter Rebbe tells us in Shulchan Aruch that each and every Yid has his chelik in Torah. And therefore a person should not say, I'll learn Torah. True, I'll learn Torah. However, only what others have said in Torah. It's not enough. Each and every Yid has an obligation to be mechadish his own chedushim in Torah. La'afashallah. Torah, to grow in Torah. And that is what the Mishnah means of the Lo Moisef Yosef. Mishnah is talking here about a person who's learning Torah. However, he is not adding his own inyanim in Torah. And for one who does not add his own inyanim in Torah, the Mishnah says it's considered as if he had decreased Torah. Then goes the next step, Uda lo yalif k'tol chayof. Pashat Pshat. He who does not study Torah deserves misa, deserves k'tol. The Rebbe teaches, Uda lo yalif, meaning the one who does not teach others. A person knows Torah and has a very good understanding of Torah. Again, this is not sufficient. For a person who the Rebbe has benched him, that he has a good understanding in Torah, it is his obligation to share his knowledge in Torah with others. Therefore, if he's the lo yalef, he does not teach Torah to others, k'tol chayav, he deserves misa chas v'shol. Udi ishtamish b'saga chalof. Then we come to another inyan. The one who exploits the crown of Torah for his own ends. Mishnah also says chalof also deserves an inyan of misa. So we see here we're talking about the crown of Torah. What's the crown of Torah? Halacha in Torah. In other words, a person who's successful of bringing halachas to people. And this is a special talent. Maybe people that are learned in Torah and well-versed in Torah, however, they are not capable of bringing the knowledge of halachas to other people. The Rebbe brought a Chazal, I don't recall the expression, but a Chazal that tells us one who has an opportunity to paskin halachas and holds himself back from paskin halachas is extremely unappreciated. So therefore, the Mishnah here is talking about Taga. Taga meaning the crown of Torah. When one goes ahead and takes the crown of Torah and uses it for his own needs, for his own ends, definitely this is not welcome. This is not what it should be. However, when one takes the Ishtamish B'Taga, he takes the crown of Torah and uses the crown of Torah to extend and reach crown of Torah, we're talking about Halacha and Torah, to reach with this Chalik of Torah to other people, this person is welcomed and appreciated. The Rebbe stressed the greatness of Hillel. Hillel continues, Hu ha'yoimer, im ein ani li mili. If I am not for myself, who is for me? Ukshani la'atzmi mo'ani. And if I am only for myself, what am I? Ve'im loy achshav eimasai. And if not now, when? In other words, we see two contradictory attitudes in Hillel. On one side, we see by Hillel a tremendous modesty. Anveson. Gemara keeps on describing Hillel. The Gemara uses the expression that Hillel was an anveson. Hillel was extremely modest. On the other hand, Hillel was a nasi. And a nasi has to have a certain amount of firmness as well. And all this we find in Hillel. Hillel is an abbreviation, the Rebbe says, Hamisnasei lekoil l'roish. One who raises himself above others. What's the pshat? On one hand, Hillel is extremely modest. Chazal keep on stressing Hillel as an anveson, as an anaf. On the other hand, we find that Hillel was Hamisnasei lekoil l'roish, and this abbreviates his name. What does this show? Because Hillel, being a leader by Yidden, there were times when he had to take a firm attitude of being of a misnaseh l'kol l'roish. Not always he was able to apply his modesty. There were times when there was a call for him to take his modesty and put it aside and act as a nasi with firmness. He was the melech by Yidden. Shammai, his colleague, Hillel v'Shammai. Shammai, his colleague, was the Av Bezin. He was the head of the Bezin. Hillel was the nasi. So Hillel, being a nasi, at times had to utilize an attitude of a misnaseh l'chol l'roish, which calls for firmness, showing leadership. However, other times, when there was no need for him to show that, Hillel came across as the anveson, as the model of modesty. And all of this we find in the teachings of Hillel. We find it in this Mishnah as well. We see his great Avos Yisrael, shows his modesty. On the other hand, we see how he stresses the greatness of coming across teaching Torah, and one should not hold himself back. This is an inyan of Isnasus. HaMisnaseh l'kol l'roish. Then we see again, Imein ani li mili, ukshani la'atzmi mani. And the Rebbe added that there's a Gemara that says that Hillel was reciting these words, Hu ha'yoimer, Imein ani li mili, ukshani la'atzmi mani. When did Hillel recite this? At the celebration of Simchas Beis HaSheva. And which is all the words of Hillel, if not now, when? And the Rebbe, towards the end of the Farbrengen, applied these words of Im lo yachshav emasai for the Geula. If not now, when? It's already the highest time for Mashiach to come. Back to Rashi in this week's Sedre, in Parshas Naso. The Rebbe learned the Rashi in Kapitel Hey, Pasuk Tes. Pasuk talks about the koyanim. V'chol truma l'chol kodshe b'nei Yisrael asher yakrivu l'koyin. All the truma should be given to the koyin. Pashat, if we do not look into Rashi and we learn this pasuk, what does the pasuk talk about? About truma. We know that there was a giving of truma, which was an obligation on every yid to give to the koyin. That's what the pasuk should be talking about. Let us look into Rashi. Amar Rabbi Yishmael, v'chi truma makriven l'koyin? Is then truma brought to the koyin? V'aloi hu hamechazer achareh lebeis hagronis. The koyin is the one that has to go searching into the fields and waiting that the truma should be given to him. So truma is not brought to the koyin. U'ma talmud lo iman sheyakrivu l'koyin. So Rashi says, really, the pasuk here is not talking about truma. Pasuk here is talking about Bikurim. Eila Bikurim. Shenema behem, by Bikurim, it is mentioned, Tavi beis Hashem elekecha. Ve'eni yedea ma yasa behem. It should be brought to the house of Hashem. What should be done? You bring it to the house of Hashem. What's the next step? Talmud loima. That's why the pasuk here tells us la koyen lo yiyeh. Not just it's brought to the house of Hashem, it's taki given to the kohen. Bo hakosuf v'limid ala bikurim sheyinitnu l'kohen. So the pasuk here comes and tells us that bikurim should be given to the kohen. The Rebbe raised several questions in this Rashi. First of all, let us look into Rashi. Rashi quotes the words v'chol truma, and all of the truma v'goyma. Actually, what Rashi is troubled with is not with the words of the pasuk v'chol truma. Rashi is troubled with the words asher yakrivu lakoyin. Because Rashi is raising the question, truma is not brought to the kohen. The kohen is the one who goes after the truma. Not people don't bring truma to him. So Rashi should have quoted the words asher yakrivu lakoyin. So Rashi bases his words, quotes the words only v'chol truma, and obviously his meramis on the rest of the pasuk only with a v'goyma. Why? And the emes is, why does Rashi have to get involved into this pirush? To tell us that the pashat pshat, it cannot mean truma, it means bikurim. If we pass through the pasuk without Rashi commenting anything, we will definitely learn that the pasuk is talking about truma. Furthermore, there's a Gemara. The Gemara talks about a kohen hamisayeya bebeis hagronos. Rashi here uses the expression mechazer achareha bebeis hagronos. Note the difference. There is a Gemara that uses the expression a kohen hamisayeya bebeis hagronos. What does that mean? A kohen would go out into the field and would help the people in the field. Why would he help them? So that he should get the truma and not another kohen. So he would volunteer to do some field work out in the field, and he would be compensated by getting the truma. The Gemara does not appreciate such an attitude of a kohen. The Gemara says that it's very improper for a kohen to go ahead and do that. By doing that, he sees that the truma reaches to him and does not reach to other kohenim. The Gemara does not appreciate the kohenim that do this. So why does Rashi have to get involved in this whole lineage of a kohen being a mechazer bebeis hagronos? True, Rashi does not talk about him working in the field, but at least going to the fields. Why taka shouldn't the kohen sit at home and wait for the truma to be brought to him? First of all, the Rebbe learns, to look inside, v'chol truma is a quotation where Rashi quotes the pasuk. Omer Rabbi Shmuel v'chi truma makrivin l'koyin v'loi hua mechazer acher l'beis hagronos u'ma talmud lo ima sheyakrivu l'koyin. It's written in Rashi letters, right? However, these are words from the pasuk. Really, the Rebbe says, these words in the Rashi should be in regular lettering, not in Rashi lettering. In other words, it's again a quotation from the pasuk. Asher yakrivu l'koyin. So this takes away already our question. Why does Rashi quote only v'chol truma? And Rashi does not quote Asher yakrivu l'koyin. Rashi does quote Asher yakrivu l'koyin. Be patient. But it's like, really the Rebbe says it's like two pieces of Rashi. First Rashi gives an introduction to the question. Then Rashi quotes the words Asher yakrivu l'koyin and tells us pshat in these words. The Rebbe says, furthermore, and refers back to a pasuk in Vayechi. When Yankov was saying his last words to his children, he's talking about Shimon and Levi, and says that Shimon and Levi should not be together. If Shimon and Levi will be together, there will be problems. Therefore, Rashi said, the pasuk says, "Achalkem be Yankov, va'afitzem be Yisrael." I will spread them out. The best thing is to spread them. So Rashi right away in Parshas Vayechi comments, what does it mean to spread them? That the Leviim will be spread all over the fields. Leviim meaning those that are descendants of Shevet Levi. Kohanim as well. In order that they should be able to collect their truma. So the child already knows that the inyan of a kohen is to be spread all over Eretz Yisrael. And to go ahead and have to go collect his truma. And again, there's a difference between a kohen being a misayeya bebeis hagronos or a mechazer bebeis hagronos. A misayeya means he's doing physical labor in the field and helping out the people, this is not wanted. However, the kohen should just be a bystander in the fields. In other words, kohenim should walk through the fields, and there the people are going to see them and will give them the truma. There's nothing wrong in that. In fact, this is what Yankov already predicted for the children of Levi, Kohanim and Levim, for them to do. And we're talking about Kohanim and Levim, they're definitely acting accordingly as it should be al pi halach. So for a Kohen to be a mechazer bebeis agronis, to go ahead bebeis agronis, there's really nothing wrong. This is why Yankov intended that the Kohanim would be walking around the fields, and the Bailim, the Balabatim, would see them in the fields, and there they would give him their truma. To go out and do physical labor in the field, to help out the owners, and by this, they will gain favor in the eyes of the Balabatim, they should give them and no other Kohen. This is taka improper. This is unwanted for a Kohen to do. But to be a mechazer bebeis agronis is nothing wrong. So therefore, the child knows already that truma is not brought to the Kohen. And here the pasuk is talking about a truma, which is brought to the kohen. So Rashi says, what truma are we talking about? So therefore, the Rashi says, we're not talking about truma, we're talking about something completely different. We're talking about bikurim. And bikurim is brought to the kohen. Where do we find in the Torah that bikurim is brought to the kohen? We will first learn about it in Chumash Dvarim. Until Chumash Dvarim, it's not mentioned. So in the meantime, the child even does not know that bikurim is something which is tavi beis Hashem elakecha. It's brought to the Beis Hamikdash, but more than that, what has to be done? So the pasuk here tells us that it has to be given to the kohen. Why take? Is it discussed twice in the Torah? Sai in Devarim, and Sai here in Pashas Chumash Dvarim, and Sai in Pashas Kisavai, and Sai here in Pashas Naso about the inyan of bikurim. So the Rebbe said we find many inyanim that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to express love to a certain inyan, it's repeated more than once. The same inyan here, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is expressing a strong feeling of love to the whole concept of the Kohanim and the Matnas Kahuna which is given to them. That is why it is repeated twice. It is discussed here in Pashas Nosai as well again in Chumash Dvar. Who is the one? Who is the Baal HaMemra? Rabbi Shmuel. Amar Rabbi Shmuel, Rashi begins. We know the Rebbe always asks that in Pshuta Shel Mikra there's really no need for Rashi to quote the Baal HaMemra, who is the one that's saying this specific Pirush. Why is it that Rashi here does quote that who is the one that says this, Rabbi Shmuel? Very simple. This is bound with another quotation of Rabbi Shmuel elsewhere. There's a saying from Rabbi Shmuel in Gemara, Kahane Messiah Kahane. One kohen helps another kohen. In fact, according to some, we're talking about Rabbi Shmuel, who himself was a kohen. So, what's the contents of this Rabbi Shmuel's message? Rabbi Shmuel here is saying an inyan which makes it easier for kohenim. That bikurim is something which was an obligation of each and every yid to bring to Yerushalayim and to deliver it to the kohen. So whom is he making it easier for? He's making it easier for the kohen. So based on kahane, Messiah kahane, which this is the shita of Rabbi Shmuel, in Shas elsewhere, Rabbi Shmuel is saying this pirush here as well, that when the Torah here is talking about chol truma l'chol kodesh b'nei Yisrael, the Torah does not refer to the ordinary truma, but the Torah here is referring to bikurim, and that bikurim is something which was brought Beis Hashem Elekecha, but not only Beis Hashem Elekecha, it was delivered to the kohen. It was the obligation of every yid, yakrivu la kohen lo yiyeh. And being that Rabbi Shmuel holds kahana, Messiah kahana, that's why Rashi tells us who is the one that says this, that the one that says this is Rabbi Shmuel, because it adds in the understanding of the contents of this pirush. If we understand properly, kahana, Messiah kahana, the idea of helping, bringing assistance to kohanim, this interpretation on the pasuk falls into the same line which brings assistance to kohanim. So that is why we do not learn here truma meaning literally hafrashas truma, because hafrashas truma is something which the kohen went after and was not brought to the kohen. What is the type of truma that was brought to the kohen? That is bikurim. And who is the one that says this? The one that says it is Rabbi Shmuel. Why? Because Rabbi Shmuel holds in the shit of kahana, Messiah kahana, so it adds to this pirush as well of bringing assistance to kohanim making it easier for the Koyanim, seeing to it that the Bikurim should be brought to the Koyanim.